Reading Places by Christine Pawley. In her book Reading Places, Literacy, Democracy, and the Public Library in Cold War America, historian Christine Pawley explores the Dora Kuani Regional Library Demonstration Project on Wisconsin's rural Dora Peninsula. Its bookmobiles had a short-lived but far-reaching impact on library service for rural communities. In the 1940s, 25% of the population in Wisconsin lacked access to libraries. Access to libraries in rural areas in the Midwest lagged behind library service in other states and more urban areas. The Wisconsin Free Library Commission, also known as the WFLC, embarked on a progressive and optimistic project to bring high-quality regional library service to a rural area in hopes that taxpayers would be the value added to their lives through library service. The project began in earnest in 1950 and lasted for 2 years. During this time, library services were greatly improved for the rural farming communities through bookmobiles traveling out to the more remote areas, bringing children's literature, fiction, and more to farming families. In one amazing figure, over 90% of grade school children used the bookmobile service. Though the demonstration project was a raging success, at the end of the trial period, Pawley County residents turned down the opportunity to continue the program, whereas Door County residents voted in favor of keeping the library services. In her book, Pawley examines the larger social and historical factors at play in these decisions, including immigration, religion, and differing cultural attitudes toward print culture and literacy. In this chapter, Pawley sets the stage through an overview of the Door Kuani Library Demonstration Project and her research approach. Using a collection of materials from the Wisconsin Historical Society related to the demonstration project, including very rare circulation records, she was able to form a picture of rural literacy and print culture in 1950s Wisconsin. Research ethics and a concern for privacy prevented her from using the circulation records to piece together individual reading histories and contact individual borrowers, so she supplemented oral histories from former demonstration staff members and local citizens living in the area at the time. These oral histories provide a unique and personal perspective on the community impact of the bookmobile service provided through the demonstration and its impact on the accessibility of print resources. According to Pawley, in the 1950s, Wisconsin was, quote, a site of cultural contest, end quote. Suspicion of social amidst the Red Scare and the fight against communism played out on the national level, and on the local level through the misgivings about the unfettered access libraries provided to potentially subversive information. During this time, Joseph McCarthy, junior senator from Michigan, was stirring up anti-communist sentiment in Congress. For many, books and access to information was linked to political unrest and moral decline. The WFLC was fighting an uphill battle against censorship, the devaluation of reading, and a hostile political environment on the national stage. This brings us to our most important sentence. Pawley argues that, quote, opposition to the library rested on long-standing antagonisms arising from class, gender, and ethnic differences that contributed to the vision of official projects to expand education, end quote. Library programming sought to expand educational opportunities for the rural population and develop increased literacy to enable citizens to fully participate in civic life. But the goals of stakeholders in the project were sometimes at odds with the citizenry. These antagonisms contributed to the failure to gain approval for the project in Kuani County. Chapter 2 provides an overview of the demographic and geographic maps of the Dora Peninsula. Pawley argues that some of the hurdles faced by the bookmobile project were deeply rooted in ethnic and class differences. According to Pawley, quote, these ethnic communities held contrasting views about the importance of books and reading, a matter of concern to reformers, politicians, and officials anxious about the effect of immigration on the quality of democracy in America, end quote. Reformers felt that a more informed citizenry will to participate more fully in democracy, but many of the immigrant groups, members of ethnic enclaves, settled in the Dora Peninsula in the 19th century, were not as willing to support public libraries for various reasons, including fiscal conservatism, a lack of codified print culture, or suspicion of efforts to indoctrinate citizens with subversive materials. In Chapter 3, Pawley investigates the history of the public library in America, and it's with progressivism, the public education system, and immigration policy. Central to the backstory of the WFLC and the demonstration project is the Wisconsin idea. As Pawley notes, the Wisconsin idea was, quote, the practice of tapping into university expertise on behalf of the state's inhabitants, end quote, and the demonstration idea was borrowed from agricultural extension schools. Larger-than-life figure, Ludi Stern, in this chapter. She was a founding staff member of the WFLC and established 1,400 traveling libraries between 1896 and 1914. In Pawley's oral history with Jane Livingston, director of the Dorr-Kewanee Rural Library, Livingston refers to her as a legend. Stearns' work laid the backbone for what was to become the bookmobile service in the mid-20th century. As was the case, library policymakers were mostly male, but librarians were mostly female and underpaid. Women, through teaching and librarianship, were in many ways the stewards and champions of rural print transmission. Most irritating sentence. Quote, in New York State, for instance, school enrollment of children under the age of 20 had risen from 37% in 1800 to 60% in 1825, end quote. This is a quite interesting fragment of a sentence taken on its own. However, in the context of this book, it represents excess of information that Pawley presents to her readers. I think Pawley needed to make tighter editorial choices about how much context to include. She really has enough material for 2 books, one on the Dorr-Kewanee demonstration project, and another on the intersections between libraries, education, and rural America. Though I appreciate the rich historical detail she has provided, sometimes her in-depth investigations into the larger national picture delve as far as the early years of the Republic. This exposition takes the reader out of the story for dozens of pages at a time. Though these tangents were quite interesting, I felt like I lost the thread of her narrative from chapter to chapter. Pawley examines the WFLC's decision to focus library service on adult rather than child readers in Chapter 4. Policymakers and the librarians were at odds on this particular goal, with librarians feeling a need to serve the rural children who had limited access to print in their homes and schools, and who would hopefully be molded into future readers. Policymakers and the WFLC wanted to appeal to adult readers, the taxpayers who would ultimately vote to approve the demonstration project. According to Pawley, quote, in their push for enhanced democratic participation, the WFLC was keen to attract new categories of patrons to the library, particularly adult males. The share of children on the post-war Dorr Peninsula fell to their mothers, and few women exercised significant political power in that patriarchal environment, end quote. Ultimately, the demonstration project was not successful in this goal. According to a WFLC study from 1951 and 1952, adults only accounted for 30% of bookmobile circulation. Chapter 5 further cements the important gap filled by the bookmobile between the rural, still primarily dependent on the one-room schoolhouse at that time, as the primary means to teach reading and writing. Many teachers were once children themselves in the same one-room schoolhouses and were excited to take advantage of access to newer and better print materials for their students. Weekly access to new books was a break from the tradition of teaching and reading the same prescribed texts. The Dorr Peninsula's restricted print culture was bound by its isolography. Teachers supported the referendum to vote the demonstration project into permanence, though ultimately they would only be successful in Dorr County. That leads me to the most interesting idea uncovered by Pawley's deft research, that of the intersections between geography, print culture, and localities of readers. Quote, from the great book books projects of the mid-20th century to present-day one book, one city projects consciously promote reading within geographic communities. Many policy initiatives have tried to build on the interconnectedness of reading and locality. Print culture historians recognize the social nature of reading that renders place significant." End quote. Morgan will pick up with the second half of reading places in her presentation. For now, I will leave you with these discussion questions. Thank you.